Every year, world leaders fly to meet him. Presidents, prime ministers, heads of state, they wait in line. They request the audience. He receives them in a building inside a country that has no citizens, no army, no economy, and no logical reason to exist. And yet, every country on earth treats it as real. That country is the Vatican. It sends ambassadors to 183 states. It maintains embassies on every inhabited continent. It participates at the United Nations. It mediates between superpowers. And by every rational measure of statehood, it shouldn't exist. To understand why the Vatican is such an anomaly, you need to know how countries are supposed to work. There is a document. It dates to 1933, the Montevideo Convention. It establishes 4 criteria for sovereign statehood. Simple enough, almost mundane. First, a permanent population. Second, a defined territory. Third, an effective government. Fourth, the capacity to enter into relations with other states. 4 requirements. Run any entity through this test, you get a clear result. So let's test the Vatican. Carefully. Start with the most basic question. Does the Vatican even have people? Technically, yes. 882 of them, as of 2024. That makes it the only country on Earth with a population under 1,000. But the number almost doesn't matter, because those 882 people, none of them are from the Vatican. There is no such thing as being born Vatican. No birthright, no heritage, no transmission across generations. Vatican citizenship is granted by employment, a legal concept called jus officii. That means the right of office. You get a job there, you become a citizen. You lose the job, you lose the citizenship. There is no word for a person from the Vatican, no demonym. The CIA World Factbook, which lists a demonym for every country on Earth, leaves the Vatican's entry blank. The only entry like it in the book, because nobody is from the Vatican. Everyone holding citizenship was born Italian, Argentinian, Ghanaian, Swiss. The Vatican is where they work, not who they are. Now, territory. 0.49 square kilometers. A park in most major cities is larger, but fine. A territory is a territory. Government? This is where it gets complicated. The Vatican has a healthcare directorate, courts, judges, a gendarmerie, a fire brigade. On paper, all the organs of a functioning state, but its courts cannot imprison anyone. There is no prison. Sentences are served in Italy. For anything beyond routine care, residents cross the border into Rome. The institutions exist. The self-sufficiency does not, which makes it stranger, not simpler. A state that has built every instrument of governance and still depends on its neighbor to make them work. And the army? The Vatican has one, technically. It's called the Pontifical Swiss Guard, 135 Swiss men, between 19 and 30 years old, committed to a minimum of 26 months of service. 135 men in Renaissance uniforms, armed with halberds and ceremonial swords. They are less an army than a photograph opportunity with a salary. The Vatican's actual military defense is provided entirely by Italy. By almost every standard diagnostic, this is not a country. And yet, here is the paradox. The Vatican operates 117 apostolic nunciatures around the world. They function as full embassies. They carry diplomatic immunity, freedom of communication, exemption from local taxes, the same protections as any embassy in Washington or Paris. The Holy See holds permanent observer status at the United Nations. It is one of only 2 such entities in the world. The other is Palestine. The Vatican is a member of Interpol, a member of the Universal Postal Union, a member of the International Telecommunication Union. It engages in formal foreign policy. It sends and receives ambassadors. It shapes international law. Something has broken in the logic of statehood. If you enjoy this kind of analysis, you can subscribe. It helps more than you think. Now, how can an entity that fails every structural test pass every diplomatic one? To answer that, you have to go back to the moment it lost everything. For over 1,000 years, the Catholic Church governed vast territory in central Italy, the Papal States. At their peak in the late 18th century, the Papal States were larger than today's Switzerland. They included an exclave in southern France. Popes were not just spiritual leaders, they were heads of state, with armies, taxes, and courts. Then came Italian unification. On September 20th, 1870, the forces of the young Italian kingdom launched their final assault on Rome. A brief battle, a token resistance, and then it was over. The Royal Italian Army took control of the city and of the Papal States. The Pope lost everything. Italy offered a compromise, a limited control over the area around the Vatican, a generous financial settlement, broad guarantees for the Church's operations. The Pope refused, not out of stubbornness exactly, out of principle. To accept Italy's offer would be to recognize Italy's authority over territory it had just taken by force. And the Church held that the papacy must be sovereign. It must be independent of any political power to function as a credible spiritual authority. So every pope after 1870 refused to leave the Vatican, not because they were physically prevented from doing so, because leaving would imply acceptance. For nearly 60 years, every pontiff declared himself a prisoner, not of force, but of principle. And for nearly 60 years, the Church had no territory, no state. And yet it was still recognized internationally. It still maintained diplomatic relations. It still had nunciatures in foreign capitals. It was still, by every practical measure, treated as a sovereign entity. But the question remained, how does a church without a country get its country back? In 1922, Benito Mussolini came to power in Italy. He needed the support of Italian Catholics. Italy was a predominantly Catholic nation. The unresolved conflict with the Church was a political liability. Negotiations began. On February 11, 1929, Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Gasparri and Mussolini signed the Lateran Treaty. Italy handed sovereignty over 0.49 square kilometers of land to the Holy See. In return, the Church recognized Italy. A cash settlement was agreed. The Roman question, unresolved since 1870, was closed. A new country was born, the smallest sovereign state in the world. But here is the thing that matters most, and it is easy to miss. The Vatican did not become powerful because it became a country. It became a country because it was already powerful. The state was the prize, not the source. The territory was given to something that already existed. something that had operated without a country for 60 years and barely noticed the difference. But did you know the Vatican and the Holy See are not the same thing? Most people use the words interchangeably. They shouldn't. Vatican City State is a territory, 0.49 square kilometers of stone, gardens, and museums, a railway line 300 meters long. The Holy See is something else entirely. According to Catholic tradition, it traces its origins to St. Peter himself, 1st century Rome. That is the Church's own account of its history. But what historians can confirm is different and in some ways more remarkable. In 313, Emperor Constantine granted legal recognition to the Christian Church for the first time. That was the first time a political power formally acknowledged it. By the 11th century, with the Dictatus Papae of 1075, the papacy had structured itself into something unprecedented, a central governing body claiming sovereignty over both spiritual and temporal matters, negotiating with emperors, crowning kings, and sending representatives to foreign courts. Nearly 1,000 years of accumulated diplomatic presence, before any treaty, before any territory, before Mussolini. And during the 60 years, the Church had no territory, no state, no capital, nothing. The Holy See was still recognized internationally. It still had diplomats in foreign capitals. It still functioned as a sovereign entity. Which means the Vatican State didn't create the Holy See's power. It just gave it an address. And this is where the entire story flips. The 117 nunciatures around the world, they represent the Holy See, not Vatican City. The UN observer seat, the Holy See. The foreign policy, the diplomacy, the negotiations, the Holy See. The Catholic Church is the only religious institution on earth that holds this standing. No mosque, no synagogue, no temple anywhere in the world maintains embassies, sends ambassadors, or sits at the United Nations. 17 centuries of accumulated presence built something no other faith ever replicated, only this one. And here is the question that should unsettle you. If the Holy See operated for 60 years without a state and nobody stopped treating it as sovereign, what does that tell us about what sovereignty actually requires? So what's your take? Does territory matter most? Or does recognition carry more weight? I'd be interested to read your thoughts in the comments. This is not theoretical. There are at least 3 moments, at least 3 times a country that shouldn't exist changed something that armies and economies could not. First moment. October 1978. A Polish cardinal named Karol Wojtyła is elected pope, the first non-Italian pope in 455 years, the first from behind the Iron Curtain. Stalin had once asked sardonically, "The Pope, how many divisions has he got?" He was about to find out. In June 1979, John Paul II returns to Poland, his first visit as Pope to the country of his birth. The communist government is terrified, but cannot refuse. Refusing would look worse than allowing it. In Warsaw, in Krakow, in Gdansk, millions of Poles gather in the streets, not as a religious crowd, as a nation remembering it exists. "Do not be afraid," the Pope says. "Do not be afraid." Within a year, Solidarność is born, the first independent trade union in the Soviet bloc. The Pope meets secretly with its leader, Lech Wałęsa. He writes personal letters to Brezhnev. He sustains the movement through martial law, through crackdowns, through a decade of grinding resistance. In 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves. Mikhail Gorbachev will later say, "Everything that happened in Eastern Europe in these last few years would have been impossible without the presence of this Pope." Stalin's question had an answer: 0 divisions, enough. Second moment, China, 1.4 billion people, roughly 12 million of them Catholic. Since 1951, the Chinese Communist Party has insisted on appointing its own bishops without Rome's approval. The Vatican has refused to recognize them. For nearly 70 years, 2 parallel Catholic churches have operated on Chinese soil, one loyal to Beijing, one loyal to Rome, each ignoring the other's bishops. It is one of the longest-running diplomatic standoffs in modern history, conducted entirely in silence. In 2018, a provisional agreement is signed. Its contents are not published, its terms are not disclosed. But for the first time in 7 decades, Beijing and the Holy See are quietly coordinating on who leads the Church in China. The agreement has been renewed twice since. Negotiations continue, because 12 million people and their allegiances are worth the conversation. The third moment involves 2 countries that hadn't spoken in 50 years. The United States and Cuba hadn't had a functioning diplomatic relationship since 1961, and then in 2014, they agreed to talk. The negotiations were hosted in Canada, but the door was opened somewhere else, not in Washington, not in Havana, in the Vatican, in this country of 882 people, by this man with no army, no economy, and no vote. In 2013, Pope Francis is elected, the first pope from the Americas. That summer, the Vatican hosts delegations from both governments, not as a venue, as a mediator. Pope Francis writes personal letters to Obama and to Raúl Castro.
Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba. In the most significant changes in our policy in more than 50 years, we will begin to normalize relations between our 2 countries. I want to thank His Holiness Pope Francis, whose moral example shows us the importance of pursuing the world as it should be, rather than simply settling for the world as it is. The Government of Canada, which hosted our discussions with the Cuban government.
And in early 2025, after relations had again deteriorated, Cardinal Sean O'Malley relays Vatican communications that secure the release of 553 Cuban political prisoners. 553 people, released because a 0.49 square kilometer city-state with no army, no exports, and no vote picked up the phone.
Esta decisión del presidente Obama merece el respeto y reconocimiento de nuestro pueblo. Quiero agradecer y reconocer el apoyo del Vaticano y especialmente del Papa Francisco.
What is actually happening in these cases? The Vatican trades exclusively in soft power. It cannot sanction a country. It cannot close a market. It cannot move a fleet. No economic levers, no sticks, no carrots. What it has is moral authority and a diplomatic network, 117 nunciatures, that spans countries most other states barely notice. Now, consider 2 countries where no one expected the Vatican to matter. Syria, roughly 90% Muslim. The Holy See has maintained diplomatic ties with Syria since 1953, a nunciature in Damascus for over 70 years. When Hafez al-Assad died in 2000, Syrian officials expressed hope the Pope could mediate the question of succession. A Muslim-majority country, a Catholic institution, trusted. Indonesia, also Muslim-majority. When Indonesian Christians faced obstacles getting permits to build churches, the Vatican used that long-standing relationship to raise the issue quietly. This is what 117 nunciatures actually buy, not military alliances, relationships in places where most diplomatic infrastructure has either broken down or never existed. The Vatican can mediate precisely because it cannot coerce. It has no side to take, nothing to gain in the conventional sense. Article 24 of the Lateran Treaty made permanent neutrality a condition of the Vatican's existence. The Vatican cannot take sides between states. This is why it refuses a vote at the UN. A vote would imply partisanship. Neutrality is not a weakness, it is the source of the credibility. Should we romanticize those victories? No. The Vatican's power is fragile. It is contingent on others choosing to listen, and sometimes they don't. The Cuban thaw was real. The diplomatic normalization was historic, but it did not survive the next American administration. The Vatican's influence could not protect what it helped create. The Vatican knows its own limits. Take the issue of abortion. The Church holds a firm moral position. Life begins at conception. But you will not see the Vatican pursuing an international anti-abortion resolution at the UN. Why? Because it knows the outcome. And an outcome that damages the Vatican's credibility is worse than silence. The Vatican is remarkably strategic about the limitations of its own sovereignty. It backs winners. It finds broadly reasonable positions with moral backing that few will openly oppose. It does not overextend. The smallest dog with a bark. That bark is deployed carefully. Because once you bark and nothing happens, you have lost something you cannot buy back. Return to the original question. What makes a country a country? The Montevideo criteria say population, territory, government, relations. The Vatican fails on population. It depends on Italy for healthcare, legal enforcement, military defense. It has governance so unusual, a non-hereditary elected absolute monarchy, that exists nowhere else on Earth. The Vatican, by almost every measure, fails, and yet the world has agreed to call it a state. The real answer is not in the Montevideo Convention. The real answer is simpler and stranger. Statehood is recognition. If the world treats you as a sovereign state, you are one, not because of your institutions, not because of your population, because of collective agreement. The Vatican inherited that agreement from 1,000 years of accumulated authority. It survived losing all its territory. It survived 60 years with no state at all. The agreement persisted, and with that agreement, nothing more, it brought down an empire. It broke a 50-year silence between two nations. It freed 553 political prisoners. The Vatican does not prove that power comes from strength. It proves something far more unsettling, that the most durable power on earth is the kind no army can take away, because it lives, not in territory, not in weapons, not in markets, but in the minds of everyone who has agreed to believe in it. And if you want to understand how power actually works, not how we think it works, The next video on your screen breaks down exactly that. And if you want more videos like this, you can subscribe. It's the best way to keep up with what's coming next.